here on Archers Way, Steepfields. It's a really nice site for birds, very small, but the surprising number of habitats in it. And so as you're walking around, you find a good range of species. And in fact, a survey was done last year. I offered to do a breeding bird survey for the Community Land Trust because I thought it would be such an interesting site. Because you've got your open grassland habitat with scrub, you've got your scrubby glade with lots of mature trees around it, gorse scrub, and a lovely bit of wet woodland down the bottom. And in all, that provides everything for a whole suite of birds. So to date, I've counted about 30 species. They don't all necessarily breed on the site, but probably about 10 of them at least do. And you have lots of resident birds you will see here all year round, like things like the wren and the robin, blackbirds. They'll be here all year. And then in the summer you get several warblers, migrants that come in, ones that have come from even as far south as beyond the Sahara. And in fact you might be able to hear chiff-chaff going in the background at the moment. There's one up the top of the slope in the trees. Blackcap, I've heard a few of those this morning too, and even though we're into June they're still going. And in this field, these big scrubby piles of bramble provide really good nesting sites for all sorts of birds. And we've had chiff-chaff and robin nesting in these, and it's partly because it enables them to make a little tunnel in there, wind their way in and find somewhere to tuck their nests really quite low to the ground where predators can't get to them. And there'll be foxes and stoats here and birds, some of the corvids, things like magpies and crows, and they're just trying to find some cover to make sure their nests, which are really quite vulnerable, don't get predated. But apart from that, you also have this long grass everywhere, lots of flowering species, so there's loads of insect life in this field as well, and that's going to benefit all sorts of birds. And you'll see great tit and blue tit coming in, and quite excitingly there was a green woodpecker last year, which was on the shorter grass at the back. So the rabbits are keeping small patches really short, and that's perfect for green woodpecker, which is looking for ants and lots of other insect life on the ground. And the key thing to notice about this site is it's surrounded by quite unintensively managed cattle grazed land, and that again is quite important, that it's surrounded by grassland habitat that at certain times of year is quite short. It's also quite damp, and I think that's why we've got loads and loads of blackbird territories here. And that's another bird you will see all year round. And now we're moving into an area of really quite well developed scrub. So before we were in the meadow where you've got your scattered and fringing scrub. Now this has gone through the whole succession process, and you've got taller scattered trees, and then underlying that you've got some small shrubby stuff, and below that you've got absolutely mats and mats of brambles and bracken and ferns. So that, particularly as this is a south facing slope, so that's really good for the bird life, more insect life. This provides really good nesting habitat for a whole suite of species, and particularly blackcap. I've been listening to a blackcap just now. In fact, there's a little family group moving around. Early season there were several blackcap territories being set up here, and they were all calling away, and their call is sort of, in some ways it's not distinctive, in other ways it is. They sound quite manic, and as if they've got masses and masses to say, and they're bursting to get it out. So there's lots and lots of fluty twitterings, and then it stops, and then they carry on again. And it's quite changeable. Apparently they're a bird that does a bit of mimicry, so it can throw you a little bit when you're listening to them. But anyway, they love this slope, and it's partly because they will nest very low down, probably less than a metre height. So what they need around them is loads and loads of bracken cover and nettles and brambles, all the sorts of things that you look at and you think we must tidy that up. Well, actually that's providing brilliant nesting habitat for everything. So the best thing to do in this slope is just leave everything as it is to do what it wants to do. Then poking out of all this scrub, you've got these old trees. There's some old elder, lots of dead stems sticking up, just scattered through, and you'll often see a blackbird there singing away, because a lot of birds are looking for a sort of songpost to set up their territory from, so somewhere they're really visible. And in fact you can hear blackbirds in the background at the moment. So it's popular with a lot of species. And then again you have lots of things like elder, flowering species, attracts lots of invertebrate life. So this offers brilliant feeding habitat for loads of bird species as well. And I think in some days this is probably the busiest bit. You can see lots and lots of things flitting around up there. You often can't see them, but you can hear them, and that's because of the density of the scrub. Lower down there's a lot of willow, and you can see along the pathway, and willow is another really important species for birds. And you can see when the catkins are out, lots of birds combing over the catkins looking for insect life. So you'll often see the blue tits down here and the great tits. And in fact we've put in a few nest boxes specifically for hole nesting birds like blue tits and grey tits, and there's a few of them scattered along the path. The bird boxes have only been in for a year, and already they're attracting blue tits and great tits. Another species you'll hear is chiffchaff, usually along the top. They seem to like the kind of hedgerows along the top there, but again they will feed in this area down here. You also will sometimes see the great spotted woodpecker flying across this slope, and again it's attracted to some of those slightly taller trees sticking up out of the scrub looking for insect life. The wet woodland behind me is a really valuable bit of this whole complex. The ground is incredibly wet in there, there's a little stream running through it, and as you can see there's absolutely loads of alder trees, and those are really good for supporting insect life. You've got this nice damp, dark habitat, and you can imagine lots and lots of little insects burrowing into the bark and in behind all the ivy that's around some of the other trees. And then if you've got a really dry year, this offers birds somewhere to feed. They need some damp ground. A lot of species, particularly when they're feeding chicks, just need to find insect life. And the adults will go on to eating seeds at a later stage, but most chicks require insects. And for species like song thrush and blackbird, what they're looking for is worms, and in the case of song thrush, molluscs, so snails, things like that. Blackbirds particularly are after worms and larvae that you'll get in the ground, so they need an area of soft ground to go and find those species, and then they can take them back to the scrub on the other side. The other thing, there's a species down here that I think I've only found them down here, and it's wren. And a wren, one of the second smallest birds in the UK, I think most of you will probably know it, and it's got that really explosive little call. They're all found down here, probably about 5 or 6 pairs, all down around the wet woodland, so they clearly like it. I think there's lots of piled up wood, brash, bits of ivy, and they can nest under those and in those. But also they're insectivorous birds, and so it's perfect habitat for them down there. And if you can see behind me, there are actually quite a few of the alder have got some pretty large holes in them, and that's the great spotted woodpecker. I don't see it down here very often, but you can hear it drumming on the trees, and the holes are evidence of just how active they are down here. I imagine there's been a pair down here breeding for years and years, and you will occasionally see them flit across over to some of the dead stems and the elder across the bay. And the other species that you may be lucky enough to see, but to be honest I keep hearing them, is the green woodpecker. And you can sometimes hear both birds calling to one another. They also live in holes, but they have slightly less tough beaks, so they don't often excavate their own holes, and I wouldn't mind betting they're using the great spotted woodpecker holes in the alder trees here. But that's a really kind of exotic bird to see, that bright green and the red on its head, really dramatic looking birds. But that's another one that I think is going to be quite focused down here in the wet woodland. So, moving along this holly-lined track at the top of Archer's Walk, around about 2006 we had a real interesting visitor. A nightingale took up residence in Archer's Walk. This was before the footpath was cleared, so this whole area was covered in really, really dense scrub, all that sort of matted nettles and blackthorn that you see elsewhere on the site. And it sang for about 6 weeks solid. and you could hear it up here pretty much every night, overnight, calling away really loud. Not heard one since, but there's the faintest possibility that you could attract something like that again, as long as we have that dense covering of scrub on the slope. So that's quite an exciting thought.